people, to another episode of Choice Words. I am your host, Jay Artist Wright, and this podcast is where we have honest, unapologetic conversations about education, equity, and the future of learning, specifically for our marginalized communities. Today, I want to start with a number that says so much about where we've been and where we're going. According to the US Census Bureau, homeschooling among Black families jumped from 3.3% to 16.1% by the fall of 2020. This might seem as just a pandemic reaction, but I see something much deeper. And for the past 5 years, we've consistently seen a trend of something much deeper. And so I'm really excited to have a conversation today on Choice Words about homeschooling. We've approached this conversation before with our guest, Jay Carter, who has the app and the organization Homeschool Yo Kids. We shouldn't forget her. And today we have another guest I'm super excited to talk to, Miss Isis Spann, who is carrying the same spirit into her work. She is an educator, an entrepreneur, and an advocate who is reimagining what learning looks like. So, Ms. Spann, thank you so much for joining us today. Let's just jump right into this conversation because, again, as I was reading about you and as I've just looked, again, I tell people all the time, I'm a parent. I have two girls that I experienced homeschool because of COVID and would have loved to continue to homeschool them had I had my work allowed it after COVID. But what we've noticed is that this increase continues to rise even after the 2020 times where people were homeschooled. I just want to ask you, when the pandemic closed schools, you went live daily on a Facebook to keep kids learning. How did that moment lead you to reimagine what learning would look like for your kids?
Yeah. So I started teaching in 2012, and I already had went into the system kind of reimagining what education looked like for kids because I was also like a freedom school intern with the Children's
Okay.
Defense Fund. So if you're not familiar with it, you're gonna have to do a quick Google search. But it literally teaches you how to make literacy and learning fun, engaging, connect to blackness and what it looked like to, receive an education that made sense for you. So I already went into my teaching career like that. And then when COVID happened, I had 4 kids. My kids were learning online. I was also, a public school teacher the year before that. So I knew that kids weren't going to get everything that they needed receiving a packet of paper and
Yeah.
receiving prints and handouts. Like I was like, oh my goodness, what? And my last class had been kindergarten. So, and my niece had brought home this big packet of paper, and I'm just like, she is in kindergarten. There is no way that she's going to get what she needs without somebody actually teaching her for real and giving her manipulatives and giving her things that she could put her hands on. So I was like, let me not just do it for the kids in my house. Let me open it up, to other families because I was also getting calls and text messages from friends like, hey, how do I count syllables? What is CVC? What is this? What is that? And I'm just like, oh my goodness, like y'all really don't know what these things are. So that's why I went live and that's why I did those videos because I knew and I also was like, not to toot my own horn, but I've been telling y'all since 2018, as parents, you need to know what your child is learning. Like, you need to know what is actually happening in the classroom. And then when COVID happened, they were just like, oh, shoot, I really do
Yeah.
need to know what my child is or is not learning about. So I kind of feel like I was a little bit ahead of the game when it came
Hmm.
to just like parental engagement and families again knowing what it looks like to be in kindergarten in 2020. Because most of us weren't in, well, at least my close circle, we haven't been in kindergarten since 1994. So that's really why I did those videos, just because I knew it looked different. I knew families were confused, and I knew I had to answer.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point. The fact that the pandemic didn't just happen and all of a sudden this light bulb went off. And I think that's
Mhm.
probably most valuable when we look at families of color. Like families of color have for a while now been looking for other options because there was an
Mhm.
epidemic or pandemic before COVID, and that
Right.
was the atrocious rates that we were seeing in the classrooms that even continues to perpetuate itself even now. So that's really a good point to note. And this is the thing that I find so unique and so valuable about homeschooling. I remember a time I was really close to my grandmother. My grandmother actually helped raise me. My
Mhm.
grandmother, pretty much, the history of blacks is very complicated. She was a lighter skinned black woman. And so she was actually allowed to read. But we know in our history, reading for black people was illegal. And so what she would tell me is that she would, she was allowed to read because she worked in the house, and that, the woman she worked for taught her and her sisters, her siblings, how to read. And then she would just go teach other people how to read. And I find that so relevant because that was kind of homeschooling. You know what I mean? Like, blacks, when it was illegal, they would gather in small places and learn how to read. And they did it out of necessity. And I feel like we are back to that point where when we look at the atrocious scores that are happening that are specifically impacting black students, there is a need for something different. There is a necessity to choose something different, because what we are seeing, that we have the options at our disposal, really aren't great options, right? Um, and so you bring up a really good point just about just the inherentness of this outside of something like the pandemic. I also want to ask you, because you being an educator, I find that, and this is just by coincidence, that a lot of the people we brought on the show were educators first, which I think is says such value to just the career of teaching. Um, and at the same time, you pivot because at some point you find that there's something a little bit off or odd about the curriculum that is going on in the classroom. Can you speak to us a little bit more about, what was it that kind of motivated you to say, okay, I got to take this a step further?
Whew, I don't know if it was motivation or aggravation. I think it started as aggravation that turned into motivation. But I really, in full transparency, what really made me leave the district in the school system altogether was just blatant racism towards me. Like, for real, like, don't getting called into the principal's office because I have on strong black queen earrings. 7 months pregnant, by the way, dealing with all other kind of things, that classroom teachers deal with all the time, and then getting pulled into the office to really be reprimanded over these earrings and how it was offensive to my white coworkers. Um, and in that moment, I just thought to myself, like, there is no way that they love little black kids in this building. And for me, as a full blown adult, to be called into this office and talk to, like, I have no merit, I have no certification, I have no right, doing this. If that's the way, if you have the courage and the audacity to have a conversation with me like this, I know that you will do and say anything to a little black kid in this school. And I was pregnant with my only son. So I had three daughters already, pregnant with my only boy, and I'm just like, there is no way that I could bring a little black boy in this world, knowing what I know, doing what I do, and not be a voice for families. And at that point in time, I had like 22 kids in my class. And I was like, okay, do I want to impact 22 kids or do I want to impact 22,000 kids? Because if the number is 22,000, I can't do that as a classroom teacher. Um, so that was kind of like my decision. And I started my business. So 2019 is when I went through all these things with the district. 2019 is when I started my business, started the YouTube channel. And then March of 2020, when my son was, turning one, like everything kind of shut down. Me and my daughter co-authored a children's book together. So we wrote Nia's Purpose for families and children that are conquering and have disabilities going through elementary school. And that's when I really, just started going a little harder and learning things about speaking and consulting and professional development that I didn't know before because all I knew was the classroom.
So let me stop you right there, because so you had a homeschool model that turned into a microschool model, and
Mm-hmm.
you also taught in the public education system. So for
Mm-hmm.
the education of our guests, What is the difference between a homeschool model and a micro school model?
Homeschool models, and I mean, everybody has their own definition, right? So for me, homeschool means any type of learning that takes place in your home. So that can be your child on a virtual program. That can mean that your child goes to a co-op and comes back home. That can mean you do all of the lessons at home as the parent yourself. Micro schools to me are for families that maybe work full time, or they are stay at home families, or they are micro school families, and they're just like, look, I need a partner in this thing. I need somebody to actually do the teaching, do the planning, do all of the things with me. Let's partner together to make this learning happen for my child. That's what micro school means to me. It just means it's a smaller setting where families can come. We are partner teachers. No matter how many days your child come, you are still partnering with me to make sure that your child gets everything you need. Whereas a homeschool, you might go to a co-op, people might check in with you, you might do some things online, but really you are the leader, and you might have, and you don't have a dedicated partnership. Again, that's what it means to me.
I think it's important to note that when I was reading more about you, you specifically focused on like math and reading. What is it that, why is that so important? And how do you feel like the work that you're doing, specifically in the homeschool and micro school place, has such an impact in the school choice model that we're talking about today?
Yeah. So anytime I get a question on that like that, my opening joke is like, reading is the wife in education, and math is like the side chick, like the side piece. Like, don't nobody really supposed to know that I'm with math. Like, we text, like you might get a what's up text about math, but reading is everything, right? And it's just like, I really wanted to be the person that said jump up and down and say, hey, we need math too. Like, math is just as important. So that's,
So you wanted to be the side chick? Are you saying you wanted to be the side chick?
no, I'm saying, look, I deserve to be somebody's wife. Like, I
Okay,
could
I
go
got
find
you.
me another man so I could so I can be the main thing. Because it's not, and I think what I found is reading is easier for people to access, and reading is a little more sexy, right? We got these pretty posters, we got these pretty rhymes. It's everywhere. Like, literally, we have libraries built for reading, right? But there's no math library. There's nowhere where you go and it's just all about numbers and all about fractions and all about counting. And math, in my opinion, has been racially for a certain group of people. Only a certain race is good at math, is what people say, right? Not my opinion. But when you tell kids that might be white or might be black, like, hey, you need to play sports or you need to read more, math is not for you, or math don't look like you, math don't sound like you, right? There's always a Johnny or a Susie or a Sally in a word problem, but there are no Taekwons. There are no, Rasias. There are no cultural references as it relates to names and places. So they start to isolate themselves. Students do start to isolate themselves away from math because they just like, oh, this is not my thing. I don't belong here. That's not where I'm supposed to be. So for me, it's educating myself more about what math looks like, what math sounds like, what math means, so that I then can say, hey, math does look like you. Math sounds like you. You are math. If we go deep enough in Black history, you'll realize that, hey, these algorithms and Pythagorean theory, like that actually started in Africa, and it traveled and they changed the name a little bit. But it's hard for you to say that you're not something that started with people that look like you. So, am I a math genius? No, but I know enough about it to get students to where they need to be, and families too.
And you know a lot because you'd mentioned, the co-authoring of Nia's Purpose with your daughter. You did mention that it also touches on cerebral palsy
Hmm.
and disabilities. Talk
Hmm.
to us about what does it mean to build all this stuff and
Mhm.
also specifically focus on children with disabilities?
Yeah. So when I first started teaching, and no knock to teacher education programs, but they really kind of coach you and teach you how to deal with the general population.
Indeed. Yeah.
There wasn't, at least that's how it was for me. I don't know I don't know what a lot of the teacher programs look like now, but from certain conversations it kind of still looks the same, where they teach you how to teach kids that already come in knowing what they need to know, speaking in a way that's clear, or moving around a building in a way that's clear. But you probably take 9 weeks of special education as an educator. That's it. And you're lucky if you get 9 weeks of that. So for me, first going into the classroom before I even knew that my daughter was diagnosed and knew that she was gonna, need special education services, I was thrown into a classroom where it was like, oh yeah, they're on an IEP. And I'm just like, hold on, what is an IEP? Like, what am I supposed to be doing with this? What does this look like? And it was almost communicated as if all you needed to do was follow this paper and make sure you meet these goals, and that's it. And I did that for maybe a month or two. And I was just like, this is not what special education is supposed to be. Like, it's not supposed to be, oh, this your piece of paper, follow this. I have to teach the needs of the kid. So if we wrote this goal in June, but now it's October and this kid is a different kid, we need a different goal because I can't get a different kid. And it was more so about my attitude, my mindset, my all of these things as the adult that kind of created what learning and teaching needed to look like for that kid. And then once my daughter was diagnosed, I was like, oh, I'm 10 toes down in this IEP, 504 accommodation, IFSP, whatever it is that has to do with special education, because now my child is a part of this, community of learners. And I need to make sure that she has everything that she needs, but I also need to make sure that families know, your IEP is a working document. When you go into that meeting, have somebody with you. When you are scheduling the meeting, they have X amount of days to respond. Because now I know all of these things because now I'm on the other side of the table where I'm not the educator giving out information. I'm the parent receiving information. So now I have to know how to advocate. I need to know what advocacy looks like, what it sounds like, and I need to form a community of people because having a child that is on a different track from everybody else is hard. So you have to know, you have to know what you don't know, and you have to advocate.
Right. Which brings me to another point. A lot of your work literally is bridging an equity gap, right? That we find often. And sometimes, especially like the national NAEP scores, for example, show that specifically Black students are not reading on grade level from fourth grade to eighth grade, and the percentages are outrageous. Um, how how does your curriculum and how do you challenge that? And have you seen it? Have you been able to debunk that theory? And this is what I mean by that. That's a systems failure. When we talk about NAEP scores and assessments, that's not a student failure. And so you kind of named it in the sense where people think that students only certain types of students can learn a certain way or do a certain thing, and they're just predisposed that way. And obviously, that's a falsehood. But I'm curious to know, as you're doing the work, what does your work do to bridge those equity gaps, or how do you challenge those equity gaps?
Yeah. So one way we bridge that is information, right? So you can't really make it's hard for you to make a choice when you don't have no information.
Hmm.
It's hard for you to fix something when you don't know what the problem is, or you
Hmm.
don't feel qualified, or you don't feel like you are the person to do it. So a lot of it is having conversations with families, having conversations with teachers, because if you already start defeated, how are you going to help this child? If you already start and you thinking, oh, there's no possible way that I could do this, how are you going to help them? And when we talk about fourth graders, not being successful on the test, this is the same kid from kindergarten that wasn't successful with phonics. So why are you thinking that you're gonna do the same thing repeatedly for 4 years with this kid, and they're magically in fourth grade going to be a reader or going to be fluent at math? So we have to have conversations around, what does this child pre-K, kindergarten experience like? Was it successful? Did they go into first grade ready? If they did not go into first grade ready, why are we surprised in fourth grade when they're not ready?
Right.
Like, they went
Right.
pre-K to kinder, not ready. Kinder to first,
Right.
not ready. First to
Mhm.
second, not ready. Second to third, not ready. And then when fourth grade comes, they're like, oh my goodness, this kid is not ready.
Well, let me ask you though, because we know based off of the systems that they don't even start tracking that until fourth grade. So, to your point, they were already not ready in kindergarten, but just accountability wise within a school, they don't start taking tests to even assess, in some cases, specifically in a lot of cases in low income areas where they just don't have those resources, they don't even make those types of assessments until the fourth grade.
Mm-hmm.
So, what can we do as people who are informed to shed light on that for families, especially families who may be listening to this? Like, if you
Mm-hmm.
have a child through kindergarten and third grade, and there has not been no assessment made, other than you probably, whatever tools you've used at home or whatever you've
Mm-hmm.
tried to explore, but you may be a parent that just is really trusting in the school system, as you should, that you send your child to every day.
Mm-hmm.
What can we educate them about? How can they do something to get a better understanding of like where are the gaps in my child's learning
Mm-hmm.
and such?
I don't know how all states work, but in South Carolina, we test every grade. So in some districts like kindergartners, they do what's called a KRA assessment, and then from first all the way up to 12th, at least in South Carolina, they do iReady. They do MAP. It depends on where you live, but they do MAP assessments. They do iReady, which is reading and math. First things first, if your child is not assessed until fourth grade, that's already an issue. And I'm not talking about report cards where they're bringing home A, B, C, D. I'm talking about really, truly like having a picture of having an academic picture for your child. From the time they enter school to the time they exit, every quarter or some schools do it 3 times a year. Every teacher should be doing some sort of assessment, whether it's a checklist, whether it's diagnostic, whether it's a spelling test. Like, there should be some sort of assessment that's happening with your child, at least, if not every month, at least every quarter, so that you can know, all right, at the end of kindergarten, are they ready for first grade? Or even at the beginning, what are the kindergarten goals? So by the end of kindergarten, I know one goal is counting to 100 by ones and tens. So as a mom, I'm counting by ones and tens at home, because by the end, I want you to know how to do this. So I think a lot of, and I know we talk about assessments, and I know that's the conversation that we have, but I like to talk about progress monitoring, because progress monitoring is monthly, bi-monthly, quarterly. So that way I know, if it's December and my child is counting to 50 and they're in kindergarten, so now we got a few more months to where I can get you to 100. If it's December and you're only counting to 20, then now I want to do some sort of psychological evaluation. I want to get some vision screenings. I want to get some hearing screenings, because you are behind the 8 ball. And as a family, if I know that, then I can go and I can start looking for services. But if my child is counting to 20 in kindergarten and then they push along to first grade and nobody never ever tells me, it's gonna be hard for them to do 50 plus 30 if they only count to 20. Because mathematically I can't get there, because I don't know numbers come past 20.
Right.
So
Everything happens in sequence, right? Yeah.
everything is a sequence. Everything is built upon. So if the foundation is weak and cracky and shaky, we're gonna tumble and fall. Like, we should not be surprised. It should not catch me or any other educator or family by surprise when they don't meet a certain metric when they started, far behind. And I
Right.
think the only time it catches us by surprise is when there's never been a conversation. When I have no idea that this is my child's experience because they have A's and B's. Like I've had families come to me with a report card full of A's and B's, and then they take that assessment and they have A's and B's on this fourth grade report card, and their reading is on the first grade level, and their math is on the kindergarten level.
And how does that happen, Isis? How does that happen? Because I can imagine a lot of parents will say that. Like,
Mm-hmm.
my child has been a straight A or an A and B student. How is it that they went this long? What is it that educators are missing? I like the smile.
because I'm because I promised myself I was gonna be honest.
Yes, this is a bold, unapologetic, honest podcast.
Uh, so first reason I left is because of the racial discrimination.
Mhm.
Second reason I left is because I was being told to give grades that kids did not deserve. I mean, turning in no assignments. I mean, not showing up. And they're just like, oh no, well, you still have to give him a 79.
And is that because of the perpetual bigotry of low expectations, or is that because the district is just strapped to make a certain image? Because what is that?
that is that is districts and admin not wanting their school to have a bad report card. Because the lower your grades, it goes against your report card rating, especially once you get past third grade. Everything after that, that's why people start getting all crazy and wild when it comes to third grade, because that's how your school is rated. So third and up, depending on what state you're in, your school is rated on how well these kids are performing academically. So, oh my goodness, if you give them D's and F's, our school is going to be a failing school. So you see these kids come home with some of them, puffed up report cards because it's just like, oh, you have to give them this grade. Or a teacher could be given, I'm going to say lame assignments or whack assignments. And of course, your child is getting 100s on this worksheet because maybe the teacher is lazy. I don't know.
So it's the rigor. So maybe the rigor just may not be where it is.
The assignments, the quiz, the test, they don't match the national level. So I know sometimes in schools, like for example, in South Carolina, every fifth grader, maybe it's grades under it too, has to do what's called a TDA. So they have to do a text dependent analysis. So that means they have to read something, and usually it's about 2 to 3 pages long, and then they have to write an essay. But guess what? They have never written an essay before that day. In some cases, they have never written an essay. So you are asking them this specific day to read something that's probably 2 pages long, maybe 3 pages if they got to do it on a computer. And now you're asking them to write a full blown essay with evidence from the text because it's a text dependent analysis. And they have never written an essay before because essay writing maybe wasn't on the scope and sequence for the teacher. So it's just like things don't really match. And I know from my experience, when I was in a testing grade, sometimes it would be like, oh no, Miss Spann, this wasn't on your scope and sequence, but you got to teach it in the next 2 weeks because they're going to be testing on it. And I'm just like, in August, we don't teach to the test. But now it's May, and you want me to teach to the test, and you want these kids to retain the information that I'm giving them in 2 weeks.
Mhm. Yeah. So you're bringing up a lot of stuff here, and I'm trying to play devil's advocate, to our listeners who may be listening, um, and and I'm only going to do it slightly because, as one of our former guests mentioned, numbers don't lie. So even if we did try to just say, okay, we do not want to demonize teachers, we do not want to demonize districts, because a lot of times obviously coming from the teaching profession, we know how hard that is and we know how undervalued that is. You are also, though, bringing up some very good points. That is, like, there are benchmarks that parents should know, that are opportunities to build relationships there with the teacher that are just being missed. And so as listeners listen to this podcast, I don't want anyone to be dismissive of how real and honest you're being about your experience, because it happened to you and you had it. Um, even if your experience may be your own unique experience, the reality of it is that numbers don't lie. And we can look across the board nationally, and there has to be some explanation of why this looks this way, specifically for Black learners, specifically for learners with disabilities. So you are naming a lot that I want to make sure people hear very clearly. Example: the benchmark for kindergarten should be that your child should know how to count to 100 by the time kindergarten ends. I don't think a lot of parents have been told that, right? A lot of what you've mapped out is, quite frankly, somewhat simple in theory, and maybe even in practice, depending on the educator. Um, and I think that you've done a really good job, and I love the way you talk as if we're all learning together, and I feel like that's a unique skill that only teachers have, right? To be able to break things down to people who aren't in that space. I want to get back to what you said specifically about students with disabilities, because this is a gem for parents. Oftentimes, we find that parents who have students with disabilities who don't understand how the system works will go into discussions with resource teachers alone, and they'll sign off a whole bunch of papers, not even understanding the context of it themselves. I want you to repeat what you said earlier, because I don't want it to get lost on people, specifically families who have children with disabilities. What is it that a parent with a disability should equip themselves with when they're going into the classroom with their child?
First and foremost, and this is just me, and I know everybody. And first, let me say, everybody don't have my personality. Everybody is not as forthcoming with their words. I guess that's the best way I can say it. As me, and I understand that, and I get that. And a part of my mission is to make more families like that. And I say that because we get passionate and angry over clothing and shoes, but we get real quiet when it comes to education, right? Like I've seen parents go to work over braids and shoes and outfits, but when it comes to the learning, they're just like, "Oh no, Miss Spann, can you say this for me?" I'm just like, "Ma'am, I just saw you going off about them not having your child's shoe size. I need that same energy when this person is telling you that your child cannot be successful." That's the first thing, right? You got to bring that same energy to the table. And I feel like a lot of families don't, because they feel like they're not the expert. They feel like, oh, well, if this teacher said this, then it must be true. If they said that, then it must be true. And to a certain extent, it very well can be true. But when it comes to my child, we're not going to say what they can't do. And
Right.
that's always my thing when I go into special education meetings for my daughter. I already go in with a list of things. Nia is brilliant. Nia is a great communicator. Nia is a great big sister. Nia is driven. Nia is one of my heroes. Now you tell me what you like about Nia.
I love that. I love that.
Because
Yes.
we're not gonna start with, oh, but she can't do this and her level is low and she's average. See, we're not gonna start there. And I think a
Mhm.
lot of families allow that to happen at the meeting. They
Yes.
allow the teacher or the team to come in with the binder and put all these things up on the screen, and a lot of times the numbers are in red and the words are in red, and it's what they can't do. We have to start having conversations about what students can do, what
Hmm.
children can do, and then look at where they are missing the mark and where progress needs to be made, and bring it together. And as a a family, as a parent, I always say bring somebody with you. If that person even has to be on video, if that person has to be on the phone, if that person has to be on speaker, even if the person don't fully know your child like that, just having a body beside you that's just like, hey, I'm here to fight on Nia's behalf, like you here to fight on Nia's behalf. I'm here to be on your team, just like just like you are on her team. And some teachers and some admin, they do a beautiful job of helping families create goals and making sure that there, is an assistant or whatever the child needs. Some of them are, some of them are not, right? They know what the child doesn't know. They're just like, hey, this is the goal for your child. This is what we're gonna work on. This is what they're not good at. Sign, and that's it. There's no communication. There is, hey, I just need you to show up so that legally we can say that you were here. This is what we're gonna work on. Sign the paper. We'll see you next year.
And I think to your point though, it also can be very intimidating, right? Because we're dealing with generational issues here as well, where some of these parents themselves may be barely graduated from high school, or they may have their own learning disability that no one has addressed. As a parent myself, I have three children. They've all learned differently in different ways. And we haven't tested yet, but I promise you, I know my youngest is neurodivergent. I could just see it. I could just see it in her. And what's interesting about it is she's the one that likes education the most. And I've been so concerned about how she goes to a traditional public school now. And I'm so concerned about, that one teacher that could potentially dim her light, right? Um, and we see it happen often. This is why championing choice is so important, because if we don't allow there to be options, then children like that get caught up into systems that they should have never been in the first place, right? And so the value of having a podcast like this is not to, say one system is better than the other. The value is to be able to say we need to be focusing on the students and understanding that all students learn differently, and their overall experiences, whether they be cultural experiences, socioeconomic experiences, they're also different. And so, why should we expect them to excel if they are completely off from the experiences that we know will help them thrive the most? This has been just a wealth of information. We're coming down to the close of this conversation, and I wish we weren't, because I have so many more questions to ask you. But I just want to ask you specifically, what does choice mean to you? And if you had to share some choice words, whether it be with an administrator, a teacher, a parent, a student, what would you want them to know?
When I think about choice words, I feel like everybody that listens to this, so no particular group of people, but what has started to change the trajectory of my life is mindset. How do you think about yourself? How do you think about other people? What do you think you can achieve? What do you think is attainable for you? Who better than you? And that's for anybody. That's for teachers, that's for educators, that's for parents, that's for kids, right? Who better than you to do this thing, to say this thing, to create this thing, to design this thing? And I feel like we talk a lot about choice and we're trying to prepare. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't prepare and that we shouldn't be ready, but we don't know what these kids are going to look like in 2031. So it's kind of hard to plan and prepare for these kids where we don't know what they're going to look like, what they're going to, how they're going to think, how they're going to see the world. Because my first grader is going to see the world completely different than a first grader in 2031, 32, because their experiences are going to be so much different. And I feel like we mess up, especially in education. I feel like we mess up when we try to plan for kids that we do not know. So I'm always like, even though I'm setting up this classroom and I'm planning these lessons and activities, I always leave room for the kid. So when we talk about education and we talk about choice and when we talk about just building new systems and building new schools, I think 50% of those plans should be set in stone. And I think 50% of those plans should be blank canvases for the kids, that so that the kids can bring in their energies and their spirits and their mindsets and all the things that make them them. Because when we build these systems and the kids come in, now we feel like we gotta switch, we gotta shift the kid and make the kid and form the kid. But no, you form the system. And if you were dead set on the school and the system and the classroom looking this way, then it wouldn't be such a headbutt when the kid comes in. So those are my choice words. 50% your plan and 50% a blank canvas so that the students and the kids and the families make up the rest of whatever your system needs to look like.
And I really like that because I think underlining what you're saying is building critical thinkers that can evolve into whoever they need to be, right? Which also, by doing that, and what you're talking about as far as who other than you is a matter of self confidence, right? Because when I go out into the world, I not only have to know how to count and how to read, but I got to know who I am in order for me to be successful, right? And so many times people miss that mark. That's a podcast for a whole nother conversation, but but it's true, right? And I really like how you named that. Talking to you has also made me think of how we are viewing our educational system and how traditional, I would say purists, traditional public school purists think that by embracing homeschool, embracing learning paths, embracing charter schools, this mass departure from the traditional public school system is now going to destroy the traditional public school system. Do you believe that's the case?
No, and I feel like people that think that way, ask them if they would rather drive a Tesla or be on a horse and wagon.
Ah, good
Like,
point.
come on, get with the times. Like, we are not in horse and carriage. We are in Teslas. We are in self-driving cars. We are public school was built to produce factory workers. If you read history, if you are open enough to accept that and know that, then you will know what it was built for is not what is sustainable now, right? And we don't have to. We can have both, and we have to let families do what works for them. And if this public school is failing my child, if this public school hurts my child, if this public school is not good for my child, who are you to tell me that I have to leave my child here? And this is where my child has to be. And who are you as a parent to feel like this is your only choice? Build a community, build a village, make a friend, so that your child has a different option. Like, it does not have to be your story. And I get finances are a thing. I get transportation is a thing. I get that uniform, school supplies. I understand all of the things that all families face. I do because I face them myself. But what we have to do is we have to start building villages to say, I can't drive my child an hour away, but I know somebody that probably can. I can't afford this tuition, but I could maybe go back to school so I could earn more money. I could maybe barter, and I can't afford this tuition, but I could braid some hair. So hey, can I braid your hair for free for the next 6 months? And you help me, like, come on. We have to stop sitting and waiting and complaining. You can borrow somebody's password to log in Netflix. You can carpool. That's all
Or
I'm
if you
saying.
borrow if you borrow somebody's password to log into Netflix, borrow their password to log into iLearning. How about that, right?
How about that? Yes, that's what I'm
Yeah.
saying.
Yeah, it is, and I love it, and it goes back to what you said at the start of the hour with your first education with the freedom schools.
Hmm.
We do have time to discuss what freedom schools are, and ultimately, we talked about a little bit, but the freedom schools were created as a model
Hmm.
specifically for Black education, so that people did everything that you just named. They learned who they were, how they fit into society, and they were educated based off of what mainstream education was expected of them. It's one of the reasons why we call ourselves Freedom to Choose Schools, because that word freedom has such a valuable meaning to people across the board. A lot of times, people who have freedom, people who have privilege, um, they don't even realize what that is because they just have it. It just comes naturally. It's like breathing. But when you don't have it and you get a taste of it, oh, game changer. And what we are presenting here is what we've experienced as parents, as educators, as people who have tried to work in systems, all systems, not created equally, and realize that once I understand, once I'm informed, now I am free. Now I have a level of freedom to understand what is best for my child. What are the types of questions I should be asking? How do I show up in a classroom? And Miss Isis, you've done an amazing job of educating our listeners for them to understand that really clearly. I want to thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me. I'm truly inspired by you. I hope that you are at a place where 22,000 students, parents, educators get to hear you on a regular basis, if not more, right? Because it's amazing. And again, this work is really about being innovative about our learning and understanding there is not one model. There is a variety, and we should all have the power and the access and the freedom to choose the one that works best for us. So thank you again, Miss Isis, and keep on doing great work.